Well, we're looking at another issue indeed. And the issue we're looking at has been an issue that's been a threat to all of us, at least since the start of 2020. COVID-19 hasn't gone away. According to WHO, we might be done with COVID-19, but COVID-19 isn't done with us. So we have seen this virus mutate into different forms, into different variants, so to speak. We've seen, I think, the one we saw before the new one was the Delta variant, which we were told was very dangerous. And now South Africa, cried just about last week or thereabouts about a new variant that they had noticed. And we all know the name now, Omicron. New developments around that particular variant, and there's still a lot more information coming out. But the latest information for Nigeria this morning was that we have now detected our very first Omicron variant carrier in the country, someone who was coming in from South Africa. So there are questions as to whether or not we should review our protocols, what it is that we're doing internally to continue to stem the spread of COVID-19. There are a lot more questions, but we have someone who's capable, who should have the answers for us this morning. Dr. Ifedayo Adetifa is the new, yes, and I say new for a reason, Director General at the Nigeria Center for Disease Control. You're welcome to Sunrise Elite this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. I don't know, should we say welcome to, I don't know whether to say welcome to the NCDC, because we don't work at the NCDC, but you have taken over from Dr. Chikwe Ihikwazu, who was there for a while and who led the country through the initial uncertainty of the coronavirus. How has your first month been since you have been at the NCDC?
Well, it has been good so far in terms of the warm welcome and offers of support that I've received. Obviously, there's a lot to do. There's a lot that the NCDC does, and it's been a period spent trying to catch up with all of the activities, while, of course, responding to ongoing issues such as cholera in particular, which is not receiving, I think, as much attention as it should. And then, of course, we've got to deal with other contending issues like, the National Assembly and oversight functions of its respective committees, and the general preparation for the end of the year.
Have you had that already, oversight visits?
No, I have had to go to the National Assembly for budgetary visits, defense for, along with the ministry, to the loans, debts, and AIDS committee, and so on.
Okay, well, you have received quite a hot welcome, not a warm one, but definitely. I mean, it comes with the line of work. I mean, NCDC before now, not a lot of people were aware of the work of NCDC or the work it did until the COVID-19 breakout. But as you said, there's been also a lot of vows of support, and you can be sure that we will certainly give you our own support as, as much as the NCDC needs it. However, there are fears right now. Omicron is a new variant of COVID-19, which the South African authorities have just brought to our attention. However, news also came out yesterday that Dutch authorities are saying that they had seen Omicron before now, that South Africa just let it known. So is this an unnecessary alarm, or is this something that we really need to be concerned about?
I think that the appropriate response to that, if I paraphrase what the U.S. president said, is the news of this variant is while it's a cause for concern, it's not a cause for alarm. And I think it's important to repeat that message or reiterate it, because there's a lot that we do not know. So the appropriate action is caution. And as has been revealed by the Dutch authorities, they probably had Omicron long before the South Africans reported it. But now, even in your introductory remarks and a lot of what people say, South Africa has been labeled as the source of this variant. But what has probably happened is that this variant is already everywhere. And the question really is not if it will be detected across the world, but when. This
is extremely important. The announcement of the Dutch authorities yesterday was extremely significant, especially when you look at the protocols that many parts of the world had already begun to adopt towards Africa. The South African authorities and even campaigners around COVID-19 have said that if COVID-19, it would seem that from the response that we've seen so far, if COVID-19 had originated from Africa, it would seem that the world would have shut out Africa completely. So it is important that Dutch authorities have said, look, we discovered this first. But does it mean, should we be reviewing our own protocols in Africa in terms of how we have handled this particular disease?
Well, it depends on what you mean by protocol. Are we talking about surveillance? Are we talking about case management? Are we talking about the overall response? I think it's important. Hindsight has 20/20 vision is what people say. The response to a pandemic with a pathogen no one has previously expected cannot be perfect. And there's no better evidence of that than how literally all of the countries of the world were caught napping when this broke out. Even the countries that were expected to be high there in terms of their emergency preparedness and response. So we've had to learn, basically crawl, walk, and run at the same time. And what has subsequently happened is, yes, some countries have done that better than some, but we were all at a position of disadvantage when this pathogen broke. And we will continue to respond in a way that assures our health security. We can't wait for things to be perfect before we do that. And again, as we are seeing with this outbreak of this new variant, people do not always respond based on the science. There's a lot of other considerations that come into play, but we hope that, especially with the news from the Dutch authorities and maybe from others who are now probably going back, like WHO recommends, to look at their samples from either travelers or surveillance from the month of October, we will probably find out a lot more places we report the presence of this variant, and hopefully we can stop the emphasis on South Africa or Southern African countries, because this can happen to anybody.
It does raise concerns, though, about just how this virus is mutated. Do we understand why it seems to be mutating into so many variants and at the rate with which it does that?
Well, the viruses mutate. It's not new. What is new is this pathogen, SARS-CoV-2, is new. But we know from flu virus, from any viruses mutate. And what happens?
As frequently as this one has?
Yes, they do. They mutate at different frequency and depending on what type of virus. So SARS-CoV-2 is something we call an RNA virus. Most RNA viruses have frequent mutations, and I'll explain shortly what mutations mean. But it means that in the course of reproducing or multiplying, their errors are made with every cycle in their genetic code. Now, the difference between some viruses and, say, for example, DNA viruses and even us humans is that we have a corrective mechanism. So like a T-Pex or something that sees an error, removes it or blanks it out. For a lot of viruses, especially RNA viruses, they don't have. So these errors are carried on into the next generation. Now, what happens is if those errors, by chance, confer on them an extra fitness capability in terms of their ability to infect and their ability to cause disease, then they get carried on. A lot of times, mutations do not provide any advantages, and they basically just die out because there's competition between all of this progeny, and the ones that are most competitive are the ones that get carried on in transmission and go on to maybe cause disease or cause infections.
Obviously, it would seem that we've let our guard down in Nigeria in terms of observing the protocols that were put in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19. In many instances, the protocols are observed in breach rather than in practice. So do you think that we need to bring back these protocols to reinstate them and reinforce them? Or would this be another way of getting herd immunity?
The public health safety measures have not been taken away when we say reinstitute them. They're still there. And the world has been responding to a pandemic for over a year now. And yes, there is a bit of fatigue. People are tired. The problems with people not adhering to safety measures is not unique to Nigeria. Okay, it's a problem everywhere. And the difference, I guess, in some respects in Nigeria is we don't have You know, in some other places, people have been violent and they've attacked people when asked to put on their masks and all of that. That is, people here respond when you remind them to do that, depending on where the situation is. But certainly, the arrival or the emergence of this variant is a reminder that the battle is not over, that there's still a risk. The fact that we're thankfully not seeing as many severe cases and deaths does not mean that we're not getting infections, does not mean that the virus is not being transmitted. And what happens is that if we have unmitigated transmission of virus within the population, you always have a chance that a variant that may be more dangerous than the predecessor, or in fact change the pattern of disease for us, may emerge. And this is why we're calling on people to return to adherence to safety measures that are in place. And of course, vaccination, which is very important.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to hold your breath. Well, not for too long, because I'm just going to take a commercial and we'll be back in a moment for more questions. Please stay with us. Dr. Ifedayo Adetifa, Director General, Nigeria Center for Disease Control, NCDC, is still here with us in our studios. And we're taking questions or asking him for updates on the new Omicron variant of the COVID-19 virus. And I think one of the questions at the top of many people's minds is, there's been a campaign for people to get vaccinated. In fact, at the federal level, there was a deadline for people to get vaccinated, otherwise forfeit work. And now there are questions as to whether or not the vaccination which they take will be effective against this new variant of COVID-19.
Well, vaccinations remain a really powerful tool in our arsenal to prevent transmission, infection, disease, and ultimately death from caused by this virus. And we believe that even if this particular variant has any impact on vaccination, maybe reducing the protective effect, it's not going to be equal to full abrogation. So you might have something like this, theoretically speaking, if the vaccine was 90% protective against severe disease and death from Delta, maybe it becomes 80% protective. So the issue is, while we work out what kind of impact this strain would have on vaccine protective effects, the point remains that vaccines are effective, they are safe, and they confer protection. And people should go get them.
Okay, because, I mean, there has been lots of analysis about how, the spikes on this one tends to bypass, bypass the cells in the body that recognize COVID-19, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if you've seen some of that. And I'm sure there are people who are concerned about that. The truth is, we do not know. This is a matter of ongoing investigation. Yes, there are mutations that have been seen in the spike proteins that theoretically may confer risk of increased transmissibility, may cause more severe disease, or may cause reduced protection from existing vaccines. But the reality is, we don't know. What we know, for example, up to date, is that the cases currently affected by this variant have been mostly asymptomatic. They've been mostly young. There have been no deaths. Okay? So we are still watching. Obviously, you need some time to see what happens when it affects a slightly different pocket of population, like maybe the susceptibles or the elderly, but we don't know. But what we know is current public health safety measures and vaccination confer protection. It might not be 100% perfect. There's nothing that's 100% perfect, but the protection they offer is useful and beneficial, and people should adhere to those measures and make use of every opportunity that's currently provided, especially in Nigeria, to receive their vaccines. Okay, and I'm sure that people are listening to you, and I hope that they take the heed to go and, get their shots. But how has the focus, because now when people talk about COVID-19, they think about the NCDC, and all they think about many times is COVID-19. How has the focus on COVID-19 taken away focus from other diseases which are equally perhaps even more lethal and perhaps even more pervasive within our Nigerian context for the NCDC?
Well, I'd like to reassure you and the public that while all of the public attention is on COVID, the NCDC is juggling several balls in the air in terms of all the other priority diseases of public health importance that you referred to, and we are responding to all of them. So the talk is about COVID. Nobody actually knows that we have teams out in 5-6 states now helping with cholera response. We've had rapid response teams in all of the states that have had cholera outbreaks. We have incident managers for Lassa fever that respond to cases that are reported. We are currently preparing for the meningitis season, so all the refresher training, all the sensitization are in the work. So behind the scenes, and we would like all of these other areas to receive equal or even more attention, but we have no choice but to focus on all of the diseases that are likely to have public health impact on the country according to the mandate that we have been given. So while COVID hogs all of the headlines, we are looking after all of the other problems as well. And thankfully, the investments that are required or resources that are required to keep those responses going are still in place.
Oh, I think that was the most important thing. Much as, yes, you also want the public to take heed of these other, threats, so to speak, to public safety and health. There'll be questions as to whether because COVID has hugged the headlines so tightly and seems to be affecting everything. I mean, I was taking a look at the front pages of Vanguard this morning, and they had Omicron infects oil, affecting a major source of our own income. Whether or not this has also affected how much is going to these other areas of threat. But you are confirming that the fact that there has been a focus on COVID doesn't mean that these other threats, such as cholera, haven't received the kinds of money that they deserve. I'm being more specific now.
Yes, well, speaking from the NCDC, we have had we have the resources from government and with support of other partners that are typically involved to respond to cholera outbreaks where they are. Obviously, within states, I cannot speak for if they've had to rearrange their priorities in terms of COVID versus cholera, for example. But the cholera, speaking about cholera specifically, the problem with cholera is not related to the pandemic. Okay, the problem with cholera is mostly the absence of what would have been long-term and sustained investment in water, sanitation, and hygiene.
And we have been on this cholera matter for a while. I mean, we did try to put a bit of focus on it, but it would seem that the news of it, I mean, especially of deaths, pettered out. Was it that it just died down, or was there some response, or is this a resurgence? What precisely are we facing with cholera?
Well, the cholera has broken out in different states at different times. Some have had a really short outbreak, some have had a protracted outbreak. Some of that is also related to the season. So
what are you dealing with now? Is it a protracted outbreak, or are these fresh outbreaks? We
are dealing with some extended outbreaks, and we're dealing with some fresh outbreaks. There is some connection between this and the raining season, for example. So when you've got the rains and areas with open defecation and normal water sources are then flooded by rainwater and mix, and then you have a problem. Obviously, when the rain stops and that mixing stops, then you have a diminution in cases over time. That's contributed to a reduction in cases, but in some places where maybe the seasonal element is not too much of the responsible, or indeed the seasons are different across the country, we have new outbreaks and we have protracted outbreaks, and we are responding to that. Sadly, cholera has actually killed more people than COVID so far. How many cases do we have now? How many fatalities have we recorded? We have had, I think, a little over 3,600 deaths, unfortunate Nigerians from cholera.
3,600 deaths?
Plus.
To cholera?
Yes.
From what period to what period?
For the period of the year under review. So from the beginning of the year to date.
What has been the response of subnationals who also have responsibility on health matters?
Well, the response, our response in support of states, local governments, and areas where there have been these outbreaks is in conjunction with the local authorities. So the state epidemiologists, the commissioners for health, and state governments are involved in that response. And we provide support, obviously, and we collaboratively implement all the action plans that are necessary. What we have said and will continue to say to the authorities is that if we want to see a different picture next year, the investments in water, sanitation, and hygiene should start now. It's a low-hanging fruit that will provide immense benefit and return in a very short period. So if you sort out potable water now, then you can be sure that the areas where we've had large outbreaks will not have cholera next year.
Well, you already said that there are already preparations for meningitis ongoing, but I know that when the dry season begins to set in, alongside meningitis, a bigger threat, well, I don't know if it's bigger, but at least a major threat is Lassa fever, yeah. which we have a season for as well, it will seem. Yeah. I don't know, there was talk around, is it development of vaccine for Lassa fever? I'm not sure which one of them now. Was it Lassa fever or, especially at the time when we're also talking about developing vaccines for COVID, there were talks around why we have not been able to find for Lassa fever. Are you aware of any development of a vaccine for Lassa fever?
Well, we have ongoing research projects on Lassa fever in conjunction with partners, including like CEPI and FIND. And there are ongoing efforts to find a vaccine candidate. Now, vaccine development is a process. As we have seen with COVID, it will go as quickly or as slowly as you invest in it. And of course, depending on the pathogen characteristics, because some pathogens, regardless of the investment, they are just really difficult to understand. So we do not have a candidate yet, but there are concerted efforts to identify potential candidates for Lassa fever that can be brought forward into trials and hopefully licensure.
What are some of the issues that you see on the horizon that give you cause for concern with regards to our public health?
Well, there are several dimensions to that. We've got challenges, although not at the same level across country with the healthcare system. I mean, there have been significant investments in those to try and strengthen it, both with federal government investment and with partners. But we know that until you reach the last man or the last village, we would only be as strong as our weakest link. So we need to continue to invest there. We have strengthened surveillance, because surveillance is the idea of maintaining continuous watch over what's going on so that you can pick up very early new events, new signals that require investigation. We've strengthened that, especially with movement to digitized systems that allow for immediate review of the data and action. But what we need to do is to take that down to the lowest level so that all of that information can be seen live in real time and responded to. I was at another meeting yesterday where we were talking about progress towards our public health security plan. Obviously, that needs resources. We will need to continue to provide resources to fund health emergency preparedness and response activities. And that is an area of gap, despite the what is actually now unprecedented level of funding provided by the government compared to before, when nobody knew about the NCDC. But we need even further commitments to that. And I think we will get some of that, and we'll continue to get some of that, hopefully.
Well, Dr. Efedayo Adetifa, Director General, Nigeria Center for Disease Control, welcome once again, and we wish you all the very best as you help us man our borders and man what is going on with regards to public health in Nigeria.
Thank you very much.